Do not talk to the operator or elevator. They are below our class. Don't talk to the people on the street. You know, you would be shaming us if you were seen talking to the people who work in the building. A very, very polarized class society.
And that's an Egyptian thing?
Yeah, it. So they were the mom actually was she was a newscaster, and so she was on TV, and so she was kind of famous. If you're up on Cairo newscasters, and then we spent a second week on the Nile on a paddle wheel on a paddle boat, cruising from Luxor to Aswan. So you are on the upper Nile, and it's a beautiful river, clear water, these little tiny sailboats of the people who live on the shores, and it's Saharan desert up to this very bright line, often just yards from the Nile. So there's green trees and then sand and desert. And sometimes in some places it widens out, and you get these little areas where it's greener and nicer and more lush. But then we just went to the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, so where King Tut's tomb is, and all of the temples. We went to more temples than you would believe existed. And if you go to Las Vegas, you go to the Luxor Hotel, you don't realize that there's an actual, we Americans, that there's an actual city in Egypt, Luxor, and there's an actual temple there, and there are these obelisks, kind of like the Washington Memorial, that that are massive, that were carved 3,000 years ago and are still standing with hieroglyphs, and it's pretty cool. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, it's good. So, given that you were in Israel and Egypt around the same time, how were they culturally similar and different?
Oh, yeah, there's nothing culturally similar between Israel and Egypt. Even the West Bank, the Palestinians are a very different culture from the Egyptians. Egypt is it's part of Africa, but it's an Arab nation, and it's very Muslim. When you get into the southern part, when we got down into the upper Nile, down to the Nubians, and you start, you can actually see a big cultural change from, up north from Alexandria and Cairo. That's more urban, and then you get farther south, and you start to see changes. You go a little bit farther south, you get into Sudan, and so just south of Egypt, you get, and Sudan goes from Arab to African.
And that's kind of the line between Middle East and...
Right. And so, but, you might think of, the West Bank and Egypt as both Arabic-speaking Muslim nations, but culturally very, very different. But both places, very warm, friendly people that would invite you into their home, and they don't have enough food to feed their family, but they're going to feed you as a guest, and they'd be offended if you don't eat their food. You drink their tea. The tea is, I would guess, more sugar. I mean, you could probably make rock candy if you just stuck a string in this tea. It's just, mint tea. lots of sugar. Funny story. When I arrived in Israel, so we've traveled from Denmark to Israel. We get off a plane, and I'm taken to this host family, and I go into their home and I sit down, and they offer me a cup of coffee, and I was told, it's insensitive not to take what people offer, and they bring me this little cup of coffee, and one of their kids is interpreting, because the youngest girl that lived at home, she spoke a little bit of English, and so I'm sitting there in their living room, and I'm going to be living with them for the next month, and I take a sip of this coffee, and it's Turkish coffee. I have a mouthful of coffee grounds. So what they do is they mix coffee grounds with the water, and then you have to let it settle. So here I am sitting in this family's living room. I've never met them before, and I'm going to be living with them for the next month, and I have a mouthful of coffee grounds.
Did you swallow?
Yes, I very slowly swallowed them and hoped that I wouldn't get sick on their living room on my first day there.
Cultural adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
So you went back to the Middle East a second time.
Yep.
And why was that?
Cousin Daniel's bar mitzvah. And it was actually, it was pretty cool, because even though it had been...
I was 8 when we went.
So it had been decades since I had been there.
Good math.
And I still remembered, like going around Jerusalem. I had spent months there, so I was living there. It wasn't just like I went on a 3-day tour. We lived in Jerusalem for 2 months, so I walked those neighborhoods.
So were there noticeable differences for you? I mean, you've said a few times that it was different then than it is now, but when you were back there, could you tell what was different?
Oh, it's much more developed. I mean, there are places that there was just a one-story, there was the Green Door, what was it called? It had a green door, and the Green Door was in the name, and it was this little place that we would go to eat. And that was gone, and instead there was a high-rise apartment building. The density in Jerusalem is really remarkable. It's very, very high rent now, and but it's still divided into quarters. There's the Jewish quarter, the Arab quarter, the Christian quarter, and the Armenian quarter. Good restaurants in the Armenian quarter, Armenian pizza.
But politically and culturally, was there a difference for you between the two times?
Yeah, it's like what I said earlier, that there's a division now. There's the Palestinians and Israelis don't interact. That there's not. That they're both isolated from each other, even though they're living a stone's throw away from each other. And politically, it's caused polarization. So they don't know each other, and they don't care as much about each other. At least that's, that I know that's a generalization. So when
Right.
they and what they believe, but there was a lot more when I was there. There was a lot more activity that I saw from the Peace Now movement, Shalom Akshav, that was trying to get both sides working together. And now I think that a larger percentage of the population on both sides is just expecting to coexist not to live together.
Was that hard for you to see?
It is hard because, you always hope for peace. But even back when I was there, the prospect of peace is so complicated. It seemed simple going there. It's like, well, why don't they just get along? Why don't they just live together? Why don't they just? And the more you get to know the both sides, the more, not hopeless, but the more complicated it. I really understood why there hadn't been a lasting peace, but we're farther away from that.
So, in America, a lot of the exposure to what's happening in the Middle East is through the media, pretty much all of it. And obviously, you read the newspaper and stuff. So, how is it different to actually be there than how the media portrays it? Like, would you say that the media is lying, or just
No.
that it's different, or?
The media is a story, and you can, with every story in the media, you can give it a different slant, a different spin. Even criminals, somebody who robs a store or whatever. Well, you can talk about the store owner and how traumatic it was for them. You could talk about, the criminal who one parent is in prison and the child was abused and went from foster care to foster care, and it's almost impossible to tell the whole story with anything. And when it comes to the Middle East, we in America want our news in 30 seconds. And so you think, you hear these stories of Israel did this, Palestinians did that, and it makes it sound so simple, and it actually makes it sound so small. And if every time somebody died of smoking related illness made it on the news, 400,000 people in this country die every year of smoking related illness. I think 15 people died in Israel last year from violence, Israelis from Palestinians, but yet people think of Israel as an unsafe place to be. Well, it's actually, when you look at the safety index, it's somewhere in the middle of all the countries in the world. It's not that dangerous, but all we ever hear about are the bad things.
So, being there, did you get a sense of the overgeneralization of the media?
Being there, I realized how all of the media does that. When I was there, I would see stories about America. And and it's the same thing. It's trying to take a very complex, large, multinational, multi-ethnic group and report things in 30-second bites. It doesn't represent anything. It oversimplifies everything.
What was it like leaving after your first time or your second time and coming back? Did it change anything?
Yeah, there's a reverse culture shock. When you go somewhere and you live there